It is the 18th of the 3rd 24, and in this your daily dose of F1 news, Estaban Ocon has spoken out. In an interview with Jake Humphries on the High Performance podcast, Estaban Ocon has spoken out about how unfair it felt when he finished F3 as champion and Max Verstappen finished in 3rd. Yeah, it was the Dutchman who went on to F1 the next season, and that Esteban had to fight for everything that he's got in his motorsport career is the thread that runs throughout this interview. Esteban speaks candidly about 2019, the year when at one point 3 teams were after him. The following year, however, none of those had transpired. Ocon was left with the reserve driver seat at Mercedes. He speaks about the perceived cruelty of the racing gods, saying that it's an injustice that he doesn't have the wheels underneath him to fight with a Max or a Charles. To combat his frustrations at this sense of injustice, for perspective, his dad would always tell him, 2 hands, 2 feet. A stark reminder that irrespective of the formula, none of the other drivers were any better or worse. Notably, Ocon remarks on his time at Mercedes that Lewis Hamilton had an uncanny ability to switch off his extracurricular activities and dial in focus at an instant. But when asked by Humphries who Ocon thought were the most naturally talented drivers currently on the grid, much to the consternation of Lewis fans all over the round, there was no mention of Hamilton. Instead, the Frenchman gave 2 names, Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc. And in this, the week of the Australian Grand Prix, the irony is not lost on us that the rumour mill around Danny Ric's seat for next year has never been more fervent. Fred Ferrari on the F1 Nation podcast said that Danny's performances are indicative of him getting old. On this very episode, no less, was Sky Sports F1's Natalie Pinkham, the godfather of the Sky broadcaster's child, none other than Danny Ric. Oof. And Danny Ric's compatriot, Australian F1 world champion Alan Jones, has only added fuel to this flame. Rather disparagingly, Jones has said that in his rebooted F1 career, it seems like Danny Ric is treading water. The Aussie champ continues that Danny Ric's best days appear to be behind him. Bad luck or otherwise, continues Jones, I'm sure he'd like to have had better results than he's had. At the end of the day though, we can't be blaming the car all the time. Something that he's had a tendency of doing has Danny Ric. Jones adds that if Danny Ric's going to have any chance of succeeding the Mexican Minister of Defence in that Red Bull seat, then now's as good a time as any for the Honey Badger to lift his game. Because on the back of consecutive second places, for the first time in 24 months, one Checo Perez is meeting expectations. And this makes Danny Ric's case more difficult. In stark contrast, the Honey Badger's teammate Yuki Tsunoda is coming for some praise from RB team boss Lauren Mekies. Mekies asserts that they're looking for Yuki to take that next step. The next step that you'd expect from the top guys. He speaks to the top guys' ability to link their core feeling with their car and relay that to the engineers. If you have the capacity, no bandwidth to do that, then you'll go faster. And this, continues Mekies, is a skill that Yuki is acquiring incrementally on a year-by-year basis. In other silly season news, Nico Hülkenberg is reported to be a top target of Audi. The German automotive bellwether, remember, set to join F1 in 2026. And you might be forgiven for thinking their power unit might be half decent. Just imagine Hulk, Sainz Jr. and an Audi Quattro power unit. Don't mind if I do. And in other news, reports are suggesting that even with the step that Scuderia Ferrari have clearly taken, that even as versus last year's RB19, that SF24 car would still be a few hundredths slower. The chaos. And that as Red Bull chief engineer Paul Monahan has said that the RB20's design evolution is their last roll of the dice. Front and centre then of Red Bull's thought process was a continued evolution of this design philosophy ahead of the new rules and regs in 2.6. Oh, the Bulls that are red have pulled a fast one here because none of the rest can even get close. So dominant even that many aficionados are already predicting a 24 race lockout for Max Verstappen. Oh, the humanity. But Wolff is diametrically opposed to what millions of Mercedes fans are begging him to do all around the world. Because Wolff feels it would be wrong, no, unethical, to lobby the FIA at this point with a view to have the rules changed. Wolff says that he doesn't want to fall into the same trap that a rival team principal did circa 2014-15. He continues, who said that we should change the rules and regs just because one team is too dominant? Oh, only a few million fans around the world world, Toto. And it would be remiss not to remind ourselves of one Christian Horner's comments back in the days of Mercedes dominance. Horner said that Mercedes have done a super job. They have a great car, a fantastic engine and 2 very good drivers. The problem is that the gap is so big that you end up with 3-tier racing, and that's not healthy for F1. Horner continued that the FIA can see what every power unit makes. They have the facts and could quite easily come up with some form of equalisation. Oh, touche, Mr. Horner. Touche. Speaking of Mr. Horner, our mate Gunther Steiner has chimed in on the debacle that keeps on giving. Steiner saying that these situations aren't always black and white. It's not easy as saying this guy is wrong or this woman's wrong. But for the sake of Formula One, it's important that we all move on from this expeditiously. And Joe Sayward has speculated on the fundaments of the investigation, saying if the witch hunt is as he thinks it is, had the findings of the investigation been damaging towards Horner, it stands to reason then that those who wanted Horner out would have leaked that too. And speaking of moving on, you'll remember the speculation around Max Verstappen potentially moving to Mercedes next year was triggered by an apparent clause in his contract. A clause that if exercised could render Max Verstappen's contract null and void. If Helmut leaves, then Max can too. An honest addendum to Max Verstappen's contract is reported today that Max and Helmut were the only ones that knew about it. That because Marco is a senior official at Red Bull, a consultant to Red Bull GmbH, he could effect this change to Max Verstappen's contract, with team principal Christian Horner all the while unaware. And some say that Max would be off his rocker to even think about leaving a team with such a dominant car. But lest we forget, this wouldn't be the first time that a dominant driver has left a dominant team. See Schumacher, 96. See Prost in 93. Verstappen, 2-4. Who knows?